Ethan made me promise to wear my shortest dress so he could show me off to his alumni friends, then told me I'd embarrassed him for speaking into the mic. When I looked him dead in the eye and said, "Oh babe, I'm just getting started," he went red and charged the stage. I stayed calm. That was 6 months ago. This morning, he was led out of court in handcuffs, screaming my name. Rosa, the janitor who cleaned their fraternity house, took one look at what we showed her and said, "Those boys never tip me at Christmas and leave their bathrooms like a war zone. So whatever you need, I'm your inside woman." And suddenly we had keys and their Wi-Fi password. She told us things that made me hate Ethan even more, like how he and his brothers would deliberately clog toilets before parties so she'd have to clean up their mess, and how they called her the help when they thought she couldn't hear. This whole time, I never let Ethan know anything was going on, and he was busy planning for the frat's huge event Paradise Night, bragging about how his dad and uncle were flying in for it, and how they were huge donors, so he basically ran the house. He made me promise to wear something hot because he wanted to show me off to the alumni, actually saying, "Make sure you look good because these guys' opinions matter for my future job prospects," like I was just an accessory to improve his networking chances. I smiled and promised I'd wear my shortest dress, not mentioning it would be for a very different reason than he thought, because that was the night we'd chosen as the ideal time to blow it all up. Paradise Night arrived, and I walked into that party in the promised dress with Ethan's arm possessively around my waist, him whispering, "Damn baby, you look so good I might have to fight my brothers off you tonight," which made me want to claw his eyes out knowing they'd all seen me naked. The house was packed with 300 people, including fraternity alumni in their 40s with their wives who came back yearly to write donation checks. Ethan dragged me around like a trophy, introducing me to his brothers who I now knew had raided my body, and each handshake made my skin crawl while Ethan beamed with pride at his hot girlfriend. His dad actually looked me up and down and told Ethan, "Good job, son," like I was a prize he'd won at a carnival game. At exactly 11:30, our president gave the signal, and suddenly every door slammed shut as Rosa's team locked them from outside, while 12 sorority presidents blocked the main entrance. The alumni and their wives started looking nervous as everyone turned in confusion, and I climbed onto the DJ platform while Ethan yelled, "Babe, what are you doing? You're embarrassing me." I said, "Oh babe, I'm just getting started." I grabbed the microphone from the DJ stand and 300 people turned to stare at me, while Ethan's face went from confused to furious in about 2 seconds. He started pushing through the crowd yelling something I couldn't hear over the music, but Maya and 11 other sorority presidents had already formed a human wall at the base of the platform. Rosa's maintenance crew had locked every single exit from the outside just like we'd planned. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the mic, but I forced myself to stay steady and said loud and clear that this fraternity had been raiding women's bodies and sharing intimate photos without consent for years. The whole room went dead silent except for the gasps from the alumni wives, and Derek Walker's face drained of all color while Ethan screamed that I was lying and just a crazy ex trying to ruin him. Maya plugged her laptop into the DJ system, and suddenly the rating spreadsheet appeared on every TV screen in the house, showing names, photos, numerical scores, and comments so disgusting that several people actually threw up right there on the floor. Ethan lunged for the equipment, but 3 football players from another fraternity grabbed him and held him back while everyone stared at the screens in horror. Derek started storming toward me, shouting about lawsuits and defamation and how his lawyers would destroy me, but he stopped dead when his wife's photo appeared on screen with a note that said, "Brad's mom at 25 found her college pics online, solid 8, and Mrs. Walker's scream echoed through the suddenly silent room. Campus police burst through the front door within minutes because we'd called them right before I got on stage, and Officer Davis took one look at the screens and immediately called for backup while several alumni wives were crying and calling their lawyers on their phones. Ethan broke free from the football players and charged the stage, but I stepped to the side and he crashed straight into the DJ equipment, giving everyone including the cops a clear view of him attacking me in front of 300 witnesses. Rosa stepped forward with a cardboard box full of printed evidence including 8 years of emails where brothers discussed drugging drinks and texts, planning to secretly record hookups. And she said clearly so everyone could hear that she'd been keeping copies of everything they threw away for years. Brad Stevens tried to make a run for the back door but found it locked, then started frantically trying to delete files from his phone while an officer grabbed his arm and restrained him. The entire Greek Council Executive Board was there documenting everything on their phones while alumni scrambled to distance themselves from their former brothers, and I could hear sirens getting closer as more police arrived. I sat down on the stage steps because my legs wouldn't hold me up anymore, and Maya put her arm around my shoulders while chaos erupted around us with people screaming and crying and trying to leave through the locked doors. She whispered that we did it, but I could see Derek already on his phone probably calling someone powerful, and I knew this was just the beginning of what was coming. The next morning, I woke up to my phone practically exploding with notifications because the video of Ethan attacking me had gone viral on TikTok with 2 million views already, and hashtag Paradise Night Exposed was trending nationally. I had 847 missed calls, mostly from numbers I didn't recognize, and someone had already created a Wikipedia page about the scandal with screenshots and everything. I stumbled to my kitchen to make coffee with shaking hands, while Maya sat at my table fielding calls from reporters who'd somehow gotten my address and were already gathering outside. My parents were driving down from Charlotte after seeing the news, and the apartment felt way too quiet after last night's chaos, even though I kept checking the locks every 5 minutes knowing Ethan was in custody, but still feeling paranoid. My phone buzzed with a call from Jessica Torres at the Title YX office demanding I come immediately, her voice sharp like I'd done something wrong. Maya drove me there with the lawyer my parents hired, and we walked into that cold office where Jessica sat behind her big desk looking annoyed. annoyed. She started talking about how I'd created a PR nightmare for the university until our lawyer cut her off with legal terms that made Jessica's face go pale. The next morning, Derek Walker held a press conference on the steps of the business school, calling me a disturbed young woman seeking attention while announcing his $3 million donation to the fraternity. Within 2 hours, my high school yearbook photos were all over Instagram with people calling me ugly and desperate and worse things I can't repeat. Rosa texted that they'd put her on administrative leave for helping us, but she'd already given everything to 3 different lawyers and her union rep was ready to fight. 3 days after Paradise Night, I tried going to my economics class, but everyone stared and whispered, some giving me thumbs up but others shaking their heads. My professor pulled me aside after class asking if maybe I'd be more comfortable finishing the semester online, which felt like being pushed out of my own education. The fraternity's national chapter announced they were doing an internal investigation while keeping the charter active, and Derek's donation suddenly made the university very interested in mediation instead of prosecution. Officer Davis found me outside the library and quietly warned that campus police were being told to focus on how we broke into the fraternity instead of their actual crimes. She slipped me her personal cell number and told me to document everything, because the administration couldn't be trusted anymore. My parents checked into the Hampton Inn near campus, my mom crying when she saw the online comments while my dad kept making fists and unclenching them. They begged me to come home to Charlotte, but I refused because running away would mean Ethan and his brothers won. 2 days later, Ethan got released on $50,000 bail and immediately posted a video saying I was just jealous he was leaving me for someone less dramatic. He showed old texts where I'd said I missed him, but left out his replies where he called me his property and said I belonged to him. A week after Paradise Night, 12 more women contacted Maya's sorority with similar stories about the fraternity, including a young professor who said Brad had stalked her for months. The stories were all the same: hidden cameras, shared photos, rating systems, threats when girls tried to report anything, going back at least 10 years. Maya's apartment became our meeting place where we all sat in her living room sharing what had happened to us, the air heavy with anger and pain. One girl named Sophie lifted her sleeve to show bruises Brad left when she'd told him no at a party last month. Suddenly, my public humiliation felt small compared to what these guys had been doing to women for years, without anyone stopping them. The next morning, my phone buzzed with an official email from the university saying they were investigating all parties involved in the Paradise Night incident. Jessica from the Title IX office sent a formal notice that I could face expulsion for accessing private property and conduct unbecoming a student. My stomach dropped reading the words while Maya called everyone to warn them the school was turning this around on us. Rosa keeping evidence for years makes me wonder what else she knows about that house that hasn't come out yet. Her comment about them calling her the help suggests there's a deeper story here about how these guys treat people they see as beneath them. Within hours, Rosa's union filed a massive lawsuit against the university for putting her on administrative leave after she helped us. 3 days later, she walked back into work wearing a bright red shirt that said, "I stand with survivors," which made the remaining frat brothers literally turn around and leave when they saw her. The news picked up the union story, and suddenly Rosa was on every local channel talking about how the school tried to silence her for helping victims. I went home for Thanksgiving break, but couldn't eat anything at dinner while my aunts kept asking if I was okay, and my uncles avoided eye contact completely. My younger cousin pulled me aside to show me a Reddit thread with 10,000 comments dissecting every detail of my life, including old photos from my high school yearbook. People were arguing about whether I was a hero or just another girl seeking attention, and some comments made me want to throw my phone across the room. The day after Thanksgiving, Maya called saying the forensic analyst she hired had recovered deleted messages from the fraternity group chat. The messages included detailed plans to drug drinks at Paradise Night and photos that turned out to be of girls who were minors at the time. The FBI got involved immediately, and agents started showing up at people's houses asking questions about the fraternity's activities going back years. Derek's law firm sent cease and desist letters to all of us threatening defamation lawsuits if we kept speaking publicly about what happened. That same afternoon, I walked out to my car to find the driver's side window smashed with a brick sitting on my seat wrapped in a note that said, "Drop it or drop out." Campus security said they couldn't find anything on the cameras, which seemed convenient since those cameras worked fine when they wanted to catch students drinking. December 1st, I was sitting in the coffee shop when a woman approached saying she was from a survivor advocacy group and wanted to help. She asked really specific questions about our evidence and who else was involved, and something felt off about how she kept pushing for details. Maya ran her name later and found out she was actually a private investigator hired by Derek's crisis management firm to get information from us. I got back to my dorm room that night to find my roommate packing all her stuff into boxes. She said her parents didn't want her involved in drama and were making her switch rooms immediately. The room felt huge and empty with half the furniture gone, and I realized this was exactly what they wanted. 2 days later, I had to go to a mandatory Title IX hearing where Jessica let Ethan's lawyer question me for 3 straight hours. He asked about every guy I'd ever dated and whether I'd been drinking at Paradise Night and why I stayed with Ethan if things were so bad. Jessica sat there letting him ask whatever he wanted while cutting me off when I tried to explain the pattern of abuse at the fraternity. I left that office sobbing, which someone photographed through the window and posted online with captions about me being unstable. That weekend, Sophie tried to kill herself after Brad's family hired a PR firm that painted her as a scorned woman making things up for revenge. She survived, but her parents pulled her out of school immediately, and we all knew they'd count that as a win. I installed security cameras in my dorm room and started changing my walking routes to class every day. Officer Davis said it was necessary because Derek had connections everywhere, and we needed to be careful. I never walked alone anymore and checked my car before getting in every single time. The constant fear was exhausting, but stopping wasn't an option now that the FBI was involved and more victims kept coming forward. December 7th started with my phone buzzing nonstop as 3 of my professors emailed asking me to meet them immediately about serious academic concerns. Professor Mitchell showed me the anonymous emails claiming I'd been paying other students to write my papers and copying test answers from a cheating ring. The emails included fake screenshots of text messages where I supposedly admitted to cheating and bragged about fooling my professors. I spent 4 hours in different offices defending every single assignment I'd turned in this semester while my professors looked at me with doubt. Professor Mitchell finally admitted someone from the Board of Trustees had called him personally suggesting he should reconsider my grades for academic dishonesty. My hands shook as I walked back to my dorm, knowing they were trying to destroy my academic record along with everything else. The next morning, I woke up to 47 missed calls and my roommate crying while showing me her phone screen. Someone had hacked my Instagram overnight and posted nude photos that weren't even me, but looked close enough to be believable. The account bio now said explicit things about what I'd do for money with my phone number listed for contact. My grandmother had seen it before the account got taken down and called me sobbing about how ashamed she was of me. The screenshots were already spreading through group chats with my full name tagged so any future employer Googling me would find them. I threw up 3 times that morning while trying to file reports with Instagram and campus security, who said there wasn't much they could do. Maya found me that night curled up on her apartment floor, unable to stop shaking or crying from the weight of it all. She held me tight while I sobbed into her shoulder for what felt like hours without being able to form words. The tears wouldn't stop coming as everything from the past weeks crashed down on me at once. She stroked my hair while I whispered maybe they were right, and I should just drop out before this got worse. Maya gripped me tighter and said that's exactly what they wanted, which is why I couldn't give up now. 3 days later, Rosa texted me urgently saying she'd found something huge while checking maintenance requests at the fraternity house. She'd discovered work orders for hidden cameras installed in all the common areas, which was completely illegal and violated privacy laws. The cameras were supposedly for security, but the angles showed they were positioned to record people in compromising situations. Rosa took photos of everything, including the serial numbers, before they could remove the evidence we'd need for court. She also found receipts showing Derek had personally approved and paid for the camera installations using fraternity funds. My therapist documented everything during our session that week as my mental health continued falling apart from the constant attacks. She wrote detailed notes about my symptoms, including nightmares, panic attacks, loss of appetite, and hypervigilance that indicated PTSD. Her clinical assessment stated I was experiencing deliberate psychological torture designed to break my will and force me to withdraw. She said she'd testify about the documented harm if this ever went to trial, which felt like the only good news I'd gotten. By December 13th, Maya noticed something important while organizing all the harassment documentation we'd been collecting for weeks. The attacks followed clear patterns with digital harassment always happening on Mondays, like the Instagram hack and fake messages. Institutional pressure came midweek through professors and administrators getting anonymous tips about me. Personal threats and physical intimidation ramped up every weekend when more people were drinking and emboldened. Maya created a detailed timeline showing the coordination required to maintain this kind of sustained campaign against me. 2 weeks later, I was studying in the library when sirens filled the air, and I saw federal agents swarming the fraternity house. The FBI raid happened fast, with agents carrying out computers, phones, and boxes of documents, while Derek stood helplessly on the lawn. They found evidence on the seized electronics of a massive ring sharing explicit images between fraternities at 12 different universities. The investigation had expanded beyond just our campus into something huge that could bring down entire Greek systems. Within days of the raid, 3 fraternity brothers contacted prosecutors offering to testify in exchange for immunity deals. They revealed Derek had known about and actively encouraged the rating system, saying it built brotherhood bonds and loyalty. One brother provided emails where Derek called it a tradition that separated the weak from the strong members. Derek's wife filed for divorce the same day the testimony details became public through court filings. The 17th brought my first survivor support group meeting that my therapist had been encouraging me to attend for weeks. I met women who'd fought similar battles years ago at different schools with the same patterns of harassment. One woman rolled up her sleeve to show me scars from stress-induced autoimmune conditions that started during her case. She warned me the trauma lives in your body long after the case ends, and court victories don't erase what happened. Her hands shook slightly as she talked about still having panic attacks 5 years later in crowded rooms. Finals week arrived, and I forced myself to take each exam despite my grades already dropping from everything that had happened. My economics final was a blur of formulas I could barely focus on while wondering if people recognized me. Chemistry went better, but I knew I'd dropped from an A to probably a C at best this semester. Each test I finished felt like a tiny victory against everyone trying to force me out of school. I turned in my last exam knowing I'd passed everything even if barely, and that had to be enough for now. 2 days later, my phone rang from an unknown number, and when I answered, this guy said he worked at Derek's dad's company and had something I needed to hear. There's something really strange about how organized these attacks are. Maya finding that pattern with Monday digital harassment, Wednesday institutional pressure, and weekend physical threats. That level of coordination makes me wonder who's really pulling the strings behind all this systematic targeting. He sent me audio files of Derek at some work party bragging about how his dad was handling that lying bitch who tried to ruin my son, and then talking about money they were giving to certain people at the university. The recordings were totally legal since we're in a one-party consent state, and the guy who sent them said Derek had been treating the staff like trash for years. I forwarded everything to my lawyer, who immediately sent it to the Department of Education, along with all all our other evidence about the university covering stuff up for years. Within a week, they opened a formal Title IX investigation into the whole school and put Jessica on administrative leave while they looked into how she'd been handling assault cases. The news spread across campus like wildfire, and suddenly people who'd been too scared to speak up before started coming forward with their own stories. I went home for winter break feeling like maybe things were actually changing, and for the first time in weeks, I slept through the whole night without waking up screaming. My dad had put security cameras all around our house, and my mom screened every phone call that came in, which made me feel safe enough to actually rest. Christmas was quiet, but good, with just us three eating Chinese takeout and watching old movies while I tried not to think about what was waiting for me back at school. When January came and I had to go back for spring semester, I found my car in the parking lot covered in red spray paint spelling out "Survivor" across the windshield and hood. Instead of being scared like they probably wanted, I just felt this rage building up because they thought they could still intimidate me into silence. But I wasn't that person anymore. I took pictures of everything and posted them online with the caption, "They're so mad I won't shut up," which got shared thousands of times within hours. Maya saw the post and organized this massive protest that brought out 3,000 students, all demanding the fraternity get permanently shut down. When Derek tried to come on campus to meet with his lawyer, the crowd formed this human wall blocking his path while chanting, "No means no," over and over until campus security had to escort him away. The video went viral, and suddenly the university couldn't ignore what was happening anymore, so they brought in a new Title IX coordinator from outside the state. She actually listened when people came to talk to her and started real investigations instead of just filing reports away like Jessica had done. Within her first week, she found 47 previous complaints against the fraternity that had been buried or dismissed over the past decade. Meanwhile, Rosa got promoted to head of custodial services after her union threatened to strike if the university retaliated against her for helping us. She used her new position to make sure none of the evidence we'd collected mysteriously disappeared from storage like had happened with other cases before. Everything seemed to be moving in the right direction until January 12th, when I woke up at 2 in the morning to someone pounding on my apartment door. Through the peephole, I could see Ethan drunk and swaying while screaming about how I'd ruined his life and destroyed everything he'd worked for. I grabbed my phone and started live streaming while calling 911, and in the video, you can hear him yelling, "I only shared those photos because bros deserve to know what they're getting," which was basically him admitting to everything on camera. The cops arrested him for violating the restraining order, and the live stream went national with news outlets picking it up and running stories about fraternity culture and revenge porn. His lawyer dropped him the next day, saying he couldn't represent someone who kept incriminating himself publicly and making the case impossible to defend. 2 months after Paradise Night, I was sitting in my therapist's office when I realized I hadn't cried in over a week, which felt weird after months of breaking down daily. She called it post-traumatic growth and said my body was moving from crisis mode to processing mode, but to me, it just felt like exhausted determination to see this through. That same week, our legal team dropped the big one, filing a RICO suit that basically said the whole fraternity was a criminal organization with Derek as the boss pulling strings. The paper said we were asking for $50 million in damages, which made Derek's fancy lawyers suddenly start calling about maybe working something out. Then Brad got arrested when the cops finally looked at Sophie's hospital records from when she tried to kill herself and found proof he'd hurt her physically right before it happened. Once he was in handcuffs, 3 more girls came forward saying he'd done the same stuff to them over the years. Maya came over one night and we spent hours drawing lines on this huge board connecting all the rich donors to fraternity alumni going back 30 years. We found patterns showing how certain families kept getting their kids into the university and into that fraternity no matter what they did. We sent everything to the FBI and the Department of Education people who were already digging around. The university president announced he was leaving to pursue other opportunities, which everyone knew meant the board forced him out after emails leaked showing he personally stopped investigations into the fraternity. The board promised they'd fix everything while their lawyers scrambled to avoid getting sued into the ground. I was buying milk at the grocery store when I literally ran into Ethan's mother, and she looked like she'd aged 10 years and 3 months. She grabbed my arm and whispered that she didn't raise him to be like this. And I actually believed her because Derek had been poisoning Ethan's brain since he was little. We started reaching out to girls at other colleges where the same fraternity had chapters, and built this huge database showing the exact same patterns of abuse everywhere. The national organization revoked every single charter, rather than face lawsuits from coast to coast. Derek's company board called an emergency meeting and forced him to resign after their biggest clients threatened to pull billions in contracts if he stayed. You could watch his fall happen in real time on LinkedIn as people who'd been kissing his ass for years suddenly unfriended him and posted about integrity. I started teaching self-defense classes at the campus gym for other survivors, which helped me feel less helpless and more in control of my own body again. The physical training helped release months of stress that had been locked in my muscles, and I could finally sleep without nightmares most nights. Then in February, the FBI found this group chat where Derek and a bunch of other rich dads talked about teaching their sons to be alphas through basically encouraging them to treat women like objects. The messages were so bad that 3 more fathers got arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit sexual assault and other federal crimes. On Valentine's Day, I decided to delete every single photo of Ethan from my phone and computer, which took hours because we'd been together so long. Maya brought over 2 bottles of wine, and we printed out all the physical photos I had, then burned them one by one in her fireplace while drinking and talking about how we'd never let anyone treat us like that again. 4 days later, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number that just said, "Check your email now." And when I opened it, there was a massive file of the fraternity's financial records going back 3 years. Someone had leaked everything, including including receipts that showed they'd been buying something called party enhancers in bulk, which turned out to be GHB and Rohypnol, hidden as legitimate party supplies on their expense reports. The receipts showed Ethan's signature on dozens of these orders, and Brad had actually written "for special occasions" in the memo line of one check for $800 worth. Within 2 hours of me forwarding this to our lawyer, the DEA showed up at the frat house with a warrant and found bottles of the stuff hidden in a locked cabinet in the basement that only officers had keys to. My grades started climbing back up because suddenly professors who'd been giving me the cold shoulder were bending over backwards to help me catch up on missed work. Professor Mitchell actually pulled me aside after class and admitted Derek had threatened to tank his tenure review if he didn't fail me, but now that Derek was under federal investigation, he wanted to help however he could. I went to our support group meeting that week and almost cried when Sophie walked through the door looking stronger than I'd ever seen her after 2 months of intensive therapy at a special trauma center. She sat down next to me and grabbed my hand, and we didn't need to say anything because seeing her there walking tall and looking people in the eye again gave all of us this surge of hope we hadn't felt in months. The district attorney called a press conference on February 25th and announced criminal charges against 14 fraternity members, including Ethan, who faced 3 counts of sexual assault, and Brad, who got hit with distribution charges on top of assault. Derek got the worst of it with federal charges for bribery, conspiracy, and witness tampering that could put him away for 20 years. That night, I actually slept 8 hours straight without waking up to check my locks or jumping at every sound outside my window, because for the first time since November, my body finally believed the danger had shifted away from me and onto them. The pretrial deposition started in March, and Ethan's lawyer tried to paint me as a bitter ex-girlfriend seeking revenge, until our lawyer calmly pulled out her laptop and played the audio recording of Ethan describing his rating system in detail, including how he kept score of conquests. What's curious is how Derek's dad group chat explicitly discussed teaching their sons to be alphas. Makes me wonder if this whole culture was literally passed down like some twisted family tradition between these wealthy fathers and their sons. The lawyer's face went white as Ethan's own voice filled the room talking about how he'd bagged a solid 9 and describing exactly what he'd done to various girls while his brothers cheered him on in the background. The university announced they were settling our civil suit for $30 million to be split among all victims, and they had to implement mandatory consent education for all students, plus create a whole new department for survivor resources. Spring break came and Maya booked us a beach house with 8 other survivors, where we spent 3 days doing nothing but swimming and eating seafood and watching stupid movies without mentioning the case once. We needed those 3 days to remember what it felt like to just be college kids again, instead of victims fighting a system that wanted us to disappear. When we got back, Rosa testified before the university board about her 8 years of cleaning up after the fraternity and watching them get worse every year while administrators looked the other way. She brought receipts and photos and even security footage she'd saved showing them destroying property and assaulting people, and her testimony led to 7 more administrators getting fired, plus a complete restructuring of how Greek life would be monitored. A younger student named Amanda found me in the library one afternoon and told me she'd been assaulted at a different fraternity, but my story gave her the courage to report it, and now those guys were under investigation too. She hugged me and thanked me for being brave, but I felt this heavy weight knowing I'd become some kind of symbol when all I'd wanted was to stop Ethan from hurting anyone else. 2 days later, the news broke that Brad had completely fallen apart during his police interrogation and started sobbing about how Derek had taught them everything. The detective told me Brad kept saying Derek showed them how to keep photos organized by conquest rating and how to make sure girls were too drunk to remember details, but not so drunk they'd pass out and need medical help. Brad named 12 other dads who'd been part of this sick mentorship program, where they'd actually have seminars during alumni weekends about treating women like stock portfolios. The FBI got involved because some of these guys worked at companies with government contracts, and suddenly this wasn't just about our campus anymore. That same week, the city condemned the frat house after inspectors found hidden cameras in the bathrooms that weren't even connected to the main security system, plus black mold everywhere and electrical wiring that could have burned the whole place down. They put up chain link fencing around it with signs saying it would be demolished in April, and watching those windows get boarded up felt like watching a tomb being sealed. March 30th came fast, and I threw up 3 times that morning before Maya drove me to the courthouse where hundreds of people were already gathered with signs. The bailiff had to clear a path through the crowd, and inside the courtroom was packed with reporters and 12 women who'd agreed to testify about what happened to them at that house. Ethan sat at the defense table in a suit that looked too big for him now, and when the first woman started describing what he did to her freshman year, his shoulders started shaking. Each testimony got worse, and by lunch he looked like a scared kid instead of the cocky guy who used to brag about his conquests. The judge had to call 2 recesses when women broke down crying, and Ethan's lawyer kept objecting, but the judge overruled almost everything. On day 3, Derek's own wife took the stand and told everyone how he'd trained Ethan since middle school to see women as investments, and actually had spreadsheets ranking girls by their return potential. She brought receipts including emails where Derek told Ethan to dump me if I didn't boost his social standing enough, and recordings of Derek teaching him manipulation tactics at the dinner table. The prosecutor asked if she knew about the abuse, and she said she suspected, but Derek controlled all their money and threatened to destroy her if she ever spoke up. April 2nd was my turn, and I spent the whole night before throwing up while Maya held my hair in the courthouse bathroom. She kept telling me I'd already survived the worst part, but my whole body was shaking and I couldn't stop crying. When they called my name, I walked to the witness stand on legs that felt like water and sat down facing Ethan, who stared at me with pure hate. For 4 hours, I went through every piece of evidence, including the recordings and photos and messages messages, while his lawyer tried to object, but the judge let me continue. I didn't cry even when describing the worst parts, just kept my voice steady and walked the jury through the timeline of abuse. Ethan's face got redder with each detail I shared, and at one point he actually stood up before his lawyer pulled him back down. The defense attorney tried to bring up my anxiety medication and therapy sessions, saying I was unstable, but the judge shut that down immediately, saying trauma from the defendant's actions couldn't be used against me. 3 days later, we found out someone connected to Derek had tried to bribe a juror with $50,000 to vote not guilty. The juror had gone straight to the judge, and now Derek was facing federal charges for jury tampering on top of everything else. The judge had to sequester the jury and bring in extra security because Derek's business partners were apparently willing to do anything to make this go away. Between trial days, I tried to go to classes, but the university had hired 2 bodyguards to follow me after someone left a dead rat in my dorm room with a note saying I'd be next. Walking across campus with security made everyone stare, and professors would stop mid-lecture when I walked in late because the guards had to check the room first. Other universities started investigating their own Greek systems, and by April 8th, 3 schools had revoked degrees from frat alumni after finding evidence of the same systematic abuse. Ethan's job offer at his dad's friend's investment firm got pulled, and his LinkedIn disappeared overnight. The company put out a statement saying they had zero tolerance for his actions and were reviewing their entire hiring process. 2 days later, Derek collapsed in the middle of his federal trial, clutching his chest while the prosecutor was reading evidence about the hidden cameras. The paramedics rushed in and wheeled him out on a stretcher while I sat there feeling nothing at all. Not happy, not sad, just empty, like watching a stranger have a medical problem at the grocery store. The judge postponed everything for a week, but Derek's lawyer said he'd be fine and could continue. On April 12th, I watched the jury walk back into Ethan's courtroom after just 90 minutes of talking. They found him guilty on every single charge, and when the judge read it out loud, Ethan jumped up screaming that I'd ruined his life. The bailiffs grabbed his arms and dragged him away while he kept yelling that this was all my fault. His mom sobbed in the front row, but his dad wasn't even there anymore. Brad took a plea deal the next day to avoid his own trial, getting 8 years in prison for testifying against Derek. He had to stand up and explain how Derek taught them to drug girls and film them without consent, how it was a tradition passed down through pledge classes for 20 years. April 15th brought an avalanche when 11 more frat brothers pleaded guilty one after another. The national fraternity declared bankruptcy that same day from all the lawsuits piling up. Derek's federal trial resumed and ended with guilty on everything including conspiracy and bribing officials. The judge said he was looking at 25 years minimum since he was 58 years old. April 18th. I sat in my car in the courthouse parking lot and finally let myself cry. Not sad tears, but exhausted ones, like when you finish a marathon you didn't think you could complete. 5 months of fighting and testifying and reliving the worst night of my life over and over. The university announced some big ceremony to honor survivors, but most of us didn't go. We didn't need their fake recognition after they ignored complaints for years. Maya and I went to get ice cream instead and didn't talk about any of it. April 22nd. They sentenced Ethan to 6 years in state prison plus lifetime registration as a sex offender. His mother wailed in court while Derek sat in his orange jumpsuit not even looking at his son. The judge said Ethan showed no remorse and blamed everyone but himself. They scheduled the fraternity house demolition for the last week of April, and hundreds of survivors showed up to watch. Rosa got to push the button that brought the whole thing crashing down after 8 years of cleaning up their messes. She wore her best dress and smiled bigger than I'd ever seen while the walls collapsed into dust. People cheered and cried and hugged strangers who understood what that building represented. May 1st, I walked across the graduation stage 3 weeks early with my degree in hand. The whole auditorium erupted in applause from students who knew what I'd survived to get there. My parents cried in the front row while Maya screamed my name from the balcony. The president handed me my diploma and whispered that I was the bravest student she'd ever met. 2 days after graduation, the university announced they were naming their new Survivor Resource Center after our group of presidents who stood together. We all insisted it should honor all survivors, not just us, so they called it the Center for Survivor Support and Advocacy. Sophie cut the ribbon at the opening ceremony on May 3rd, her hands steady as she spoke about turning pain into purpose. That same week, I started packing up my apartment, wrapping dishes I'd thrown against walls during my worst nights and folding clothes I'd worn to court. Brad completely breaking down and telling everything about Derek's teaching methods seems too convenient. Why did he suddenly decide to spill all these details about conquest ratings and seminars? Each box felt lighter than the memories these walls had witnessed. The breakdown after Paradise Night, the panic attacks, the slow rebuilding of myself piece by piece. Rosa called me while I was taping boxes to tell me she'd been hired by 3 universities as a consultant on protecting vulnerable staff and students from harassment. She texted me a photo of her first consulting check with a sticky note that said, "From the help to the helper," and I cried happy tears onto my packing tape. May 10th, I walked into a law firm in downtown that specialized in campus sexual assault cases for my first day as an intern. My supervisor introduced herself as a survivor from 20 years ago who'd built this practice to be what she'd needed back then. She showed me to my desk and said we were building the support system we'd wished existed when we needed it most. 3 days later, I loaded everything I owned into a rental truck headed for Washington, D.C., where the firm's main office was located. The miles between me and campus felt like freedom. Each state line crossed another step away from the place where everything happened. My new roommate in D.C. didn't know my story, and that anonymity felt like the best gift anyone could give me. The night before I left, Maya and I had dinner at our favorite restaurant where we'd planned the Paradise Night reveal 6 months earlier. She looked at me across the table, both of us so different from who we'd been in November, and told me I hadn't just survived, but showed everyone how to fight back. back. May 18th. My phone buzzed with news alerts that 3 more universities were closing fraternity chapters after investigations sparked by what happened at our school. The ripple effects kept spreading, changing Greek life policies at schools across the country, proving that speaking up actually worked even when it felt impossible. That weekend, I deleted all my social media accounts except LinkedIn, choosing privacy over the constant messages and scrutiny. With one click, I took back control of my own narrative. No longer the girl from the viral video, but just another law intern in a city full of them. My last therapy session happened over video call from my new apartment. My therapist telling me I was remarkably resilient, though we both knew these scars would never fully disappear. She reminded me that healing wasn't about forgetting, but learning to live with the truth of what happened and who I became because of it. May 30th arrived, and I stood in front of my closet, choosing what to wear for my first real day at the law firm after orientation. My hand landed on the dress from Paradise Night, the one Ethan had demanded I wear to show off to his alumni friends. I put it on and looked in the mirror, seeing not the girl who'd been violated and betrayed, but the woman who'd fought back and won. Walking into the firm that morning, my supervisor introduced me to our newest client, another college student whose sorority sisters had drugged her at a mixer. She sat there shaking, holding her phone with evidence she was scared to share, looking exactly how I'd looked 6 months ago in that police station. I reached out my hand to shake hers and told her I understood what she was going through and that I would help her through this. The cycle of survival and support continued, each victory building on the last, proving that speaking truth to power worked even when power fought back viciously. That was a blast. I love just sitting here and tossing around all these questions with you. Always something new to think about. I'll see you in the next one. Like the video. It helps more than you think.